to Bad Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and Tony has the bad idea for us this week about someone trying to solve the problem of those nasty, nasty cigarettes. Tony, what do you got?
Today we're going to be talking about the premier cigarette from the RJ Reynolds company. It's basically a new idea for a smokeless cigarette.
Okay. RJ Reynolds sounds familiar.
RJ Reynolds is pretty familiar. They are also partially owned by the Nabisco company. There's a lot of different things that they cover. They are also the ones that make Newport, Camel, Doral, Eclipse, Kent, and Pall Mall cigarettes, as well as lots of other cigarettes. So they're a pretty big name in that industry. It's kind of like Philip Morris and some of the other ones.
Spoilers for the end of this, they don't go out of business, apparently. They do make it through this bad idea.
That seems to be a thing for a lot of the companies we cover. Not all of them make it, like the Q-Cat, but quite a few of them do. So anyway, do you know what the problem is with smoking? Could it be cancer, the smell, the addiction, the cardio issues? No, it was the fact that it had smoke, or so the RJ Reynolds company thought.
Well, it is right there in the name. You can't smoke without... It's called smoking, Tony.
Yeah, it's like they could have just chewed if they didn't want to smoke, but a lot of the health concerns that were popping up in the late 80s and early 90s, and it was before that really, but this is whenever people really started hitting hard on the whole cigarettes cause cancer and everything just kind of going crazy for the cigarette companies. They were looking for alternatives that would still allow them to stay in business as people kept quitting. At this time, they were losing about 2% of their market share every single year, and that was really starting to wear on them. However, it didn't really wear on them in the same way as people thought, because the international sales were actually going up faster than U.S. sales were declining, so they still had pretty good buffer going on. They just didn't want to lose that American audience.
You always you can't ever sit on your lees, right? When we learned that from Blockbuster, even if it seems okay now, you still got to be striving and looking for new products and inventing things that people are going to think are healthy.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it now, a lot of smoking happens with vape pens and e-cigarettes in various forms that were somewhat similar to this. This was just a really, really early prototype that did not work at all.
Well, tell us about it.
To try to stop the hemorrhaging of cigarette users, the RJ Reynolds company started development on the Premier. With $300 million spent on research, the predecessor to the e-cigarette was ready to hit the market.
I like how they pivoted into making video editing software.
Yeah. I don't know how they bridge that gap between Adobe and charcoal cigarettes and everything else, but they got it there.
You know that all these guys in their edit bays are just smoking it up. They just need to make it more healthy.
That's probably actually a little bit true. I know, I've done it before. At the same time, they also tried resurrecting some older mascots. They brought back Joe Camel, who was apparently the coolest camel to ever smoke. Over the coming years, they would face many lawsuits saying that the cartoon was targeted towards children and trying to make smoking look cooler. Several studies would prove that it actually worked to lure children, and eventually Joe Camel would get phased out. Some of the studies show that Joe Camel was more recognizable in some parts of the world than Mickey Mouse.
Which parts of the world specifically?
Parts of Asia.
Okay. I was just interested if it was... I'm thinking Russia for some reason. I don't know why, but just
Russia is part of Asia.
Yes. I'm thinking of them with their hard drinking and probably hard smoking, and they don't have no time for no Happy Mouse.
Yeah, definitely not.
They want a coffin camel.
And I was always skeptical of how effective those would be, because I remember being a kid and I thought, oh, that's kind of a cool thing, but it never made me want to smoke cigarettes. And I'm one of the weird kids that actually thought cigarette smoking looked cool as a kid, so Joe Camel had a neutral effect on me. But
okay.
That's completely irrelevant to what we're talking about here.
Yes, tell us about this smokeless smoking that these guys tried to get going.
All right, the way the cigarette worked was a carbon capsule that would ignite whenever you put a lighter to it. The smoker, by inhaling, draws the hot air through that burning piece of carbon, which looks like a little piece of charcoal at the end of the cigarette, and it was basically going through an aluminum pouch with rolled tobacco in it. And it was a flavor capsule that was embedded in the tobacco, and it also contained nicotine and some other flavoring packages, so it wasn't quite as much as just the raw tobacco that you would get from normal smoking.
Okay. And I'm looking at a picture of it right now. They made it look as much like a cigarette as they could.
Yeah, it looks like a cigarette. Almost looks like it's plastic, but it's just a different type of paper for different parts of it. So it's slightly different colored depending on which brand you chose. because it was mainly the Premier, but they did try it with a few of their other brands to go along with what they were already selling. But it kind of looks plasticky in a weird way. And what was interesting with this is it also never needed to be ashed, because that little charcoal thing in the aluminum foil roll kept it from burning the paper. The paper would turn brown from the heat, but it actually wouldn't ash or burn down. So whenever you finished the cigarette, it was just a full-size cigarette piece of trash left over. Okay. They wanted you to be able to put it back into a separate pack to throw it away, because it would cause the other cigarettes to have a weird flavor if you just put that back in. But they were a little concerned with the waste.
It might cause. That's why the other cigarettes might have a weird flavor, huh? Yes. I'm getting ahead of you here. I did want to ask, was there any evidence that this was actually healthier? Because I could see possibly if you're not actually burning tobacco, maybe you don't end up with as much tar in your lungs. Yeah, maybe there is something to this.
The FDA wanted them to verify the claims that they were making that it wasn't as bad as normal cigarette smoking, but the product wasn't really around long enough for them to get that full verification for those sorts of facts. But the FDA was starting to hound them as soon as those cigarettes came out. The Surgeon General at the time wanted to make sure that these were actually less tar and everything else, or might be able to be used as a supplement to help people quit, or various other things that people would use, like what they do with e-cigarettes now.
Well, even if they didn't have 100% verification, it sounds like you got a cigarette. Maybe it's healthier for you than the other thing. What's the problem?
Well, for starters, it tasted absolutely horrible. The phrase most often used during surveys about the cigarettes is a word for excrement that we can't use on this podcast because it's a clean one. And many said it also tasted like burning plastic to go along with that.
Oh, that's your combination right there.
Yeah, apparently there was a sweet spot where you'd get like 3 or 4 puffs where it would taste like a normal cigarette, but the rest of it absolutely tasted like
Okay. So not a great start. Now, as someone who doesn't smoke, I gotta say, I can imagine the first hit of a cigarette probably wouldn't taste that great either.
It's not as bad as you would think. I haven't smoked many cigarettes, but I smoke cigars, and it's always been a very pleasant, tobacco flavoring to go with cigars.
Okay.
So it's not as bad as you would think. Some cigarettes are way, way worse than others. Like if you look at filterless cigarettes, it's going to be a much stronger taste. The RJ Reynolds company told users to try it for a whole pack or 3, not just a single cigarette. They had a spokesman say, "It's not a one cigarette." Mara Page said, "We tell them to try it for either a week or a carton, whatever comes first. People say, 'Golly gosh, is it lit? There's no smoke. I can't flick the ash.' But after a week, that seems to fade away and people say, 'Yes, I'll take it,' or 'Yes, I'll make the switch.'"
This reminds me of my childhood where I grew up and my family ate a lot of pickled herring, Tony. And I didn't enjoy pickled herring, but they enjoyed it. And I wanted to enjoy it so bad that I just ate a bunch of it until I started enjoying it. This is that equivalent. They're saying, no, we know that it sucks, but just keep going until it stops sucking for you, all right?
I mean, they do have the benefit that it is addictive, so at least there's that. They might be able to make it work, but of course no one actually made the switch. But good on that spokeswoman for adding "golly gosh" to an official press release. That might have been okay in the 1950s, but it was almost the 90s when she said this.
Well, she was on a clean podcast. She couldn't say the words she wanted to.
Yeah. And along with this, they said that most of the people who would buy a pack, the people who would actually go out and seek these out, they would buy a pack, they would determine that it was horrible, then they would hand them to their friends, because you always want to make your friends suffer whenever you've suffered. And everybody would try it, and then what was ever left of the pack usually got thrown away.
These guys are so lucky this didn't happen in the age of YouTube. This would have been the Tide Pods of the late 80s.
It pretty much would have been. Instead, they just slowly got to fade out until podcasts discover them and talk about bad ideas. On top of all of this, there were specific instructions to use a lighter instead of a match. Using a match would cause a reaction between the carbon and the sulfur, which would give a very distinct fart smell while you smoked.
I'm glad we have this and not asbestos today, Tony.
Yeah.
I needed fart smells in my life today.
And it's like, yeah, we aren't trying to make light of lung cancer or anything like that, but this was a failed product of the cigarette company, so it's a little easier to laugh at them.
Yes, it is ironic. The cigarettes are already a bad idea. This is just a worse It's also probably unhealthy for you, and it tastes terrible.
Yep. Just all around a bad product. The pull on these cigarettes was also much harder, causing you to have to use the full force of your lungs to get a good hit off of the cigarette. This led to comical faces, extremely hot smoke, and general dissatisfaction. So you're just getting this horrible, like, sucking faces. Your face is turning slightly red, trying to get a slight pull. Then you get the slightest puff of
smell
smoke.
of farts filling the room.
Yeah, so, like, you're just really having to work hard for this mediocre smoke.
And then you're like, no, it's not that bad. You pass it off to your friends to try.
As your breath tastes like plastic and everything else.
Yeah.
According to a 1989 New York Times article, the only outright favorable comments about the premiere came from high school students in Tucson, who said that the cigarette was being used by students sneaking school-time smokes. A lot of people at school smoke them in the halls because they make so little smoke, said Travis Williams, an 11th grader. You still have to hide it, but it doesn't make as much smoke. I don't do it, but a lot of people do. Just imagining someone with, like, their head in their locker getting a few bad pulls off of this fart-smelling cigarette.
They're walking down the fart-smelling aisle of the high school as somebody's choking on plastic smoke. It's really trying to get that nicotine hit in because of Joe Camel.
One of the final nails in the coffin of the premier cigarette came when a rumor started that you could use these cigarettes to smoke crack cocaine. The cigarette that was supposed to be healthier for you started to be associated with the crack epidemic of the 1980s.
That seems, I mean, you say nail, that's like a straw on the camel's back. If they weren't already getting a bunch of crap for it, I think the high school student angle actually would have been really good.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say, like, we're directing this towards the high school students, but if there would have been enough high school students into it, that might have saved the brand a little bit.
I think if you used a lot of commercials with the word discreet,
that
right?
would have been a good idea. Like they just didn't have the marketing people behind it.
I guess we could have saved it, Tony. We could have saved this poop smelling, fart tasting cigarette.
We had all the clues. After $350 million in development costs, an additional $550 million in production, distribution, advertising, and so on, the premier cigarette cost the RJ Reynolds company close to $1 billion for a cigarette that didn't even last 1 year on the market.
Fortunately, Big Tobacco has that kind of money to burn.
Yes, they do. They were quoted as saying that it's not a make or break for the company, it's just a very unfortunate event. It is interesting that tobacco products are in a sort of new renaissance with vaping, and that for many smoking seems cool again. RJR might have been onto something with an alternative delivery system, but the one they developed was an utter and total flop. So the bad idea here is pretty much smoking because it's terrible for you, but also that if you're going to make something as an alternative, make sure it doesn't taste like poop.
Plus, they already have nicotine gum. You could just eat that, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure that gives the satisfaction, though.
Does it not? I always thought that people liked smoking for the nicotine.
A lot of it's the action of smoking, the oral fixation, the social aspect. There's a lot of reasons why people smoke, and chewing gum isn't nearly the social activity that going out with your coworkers to, like, sit on a corner and take 10 minutes away from work is.
Well, I'm a shut-in, Tony, so I don't know anything about that. And I don't smoke.
Yeah, and you've never you've never tried a single cigarette or a cigar.
That's correct. I want to try a cigar one day, Tony, but today is not that day.
I actually recently quit smoking shisha. Like, I was smoking way too much shisha, which is basically tobacco covered in molasses inside of a bowl with a hookah delivery system, and it uses charcoal for the heating element, and that actually tastes like fruit, and the smoke doesn't smell and all that, so I can see part of what must have inspired this in that, but it's still so terrible for you. Like, I could hear my breathing in every product we did, and I was like, this is not acceptable anymore. I speak for a living. I can't be like doing all that stuff. So I was recently able to quit.
Well, I'm proud of you, Tony. And I'm proud of our listeners for listening today. Thank you guys so much. If you like this show, you can go to patreon.com/humanechoes and help us make it some more. For as little as $2 a month, you can get things like postcards from us that we have signed and Hannah sends out for us. She's one of the people who works with us. And you also make this possible.
the next level up, you get pins and so on, and you also get early releases of a ton of different products. So if you guys enjoy this and want to see it thrive, $2, $5, $10, anything like that per month is a huge, huge gesture. Patreon.com/Human Echoes. Also, if you like gaming content, check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Human Echoes.
And if you have bad ideas, don't forget to send them in to badideasshow@gmail.com or at Human Echoes on Twitter. I forget.
Yeah, at Human Echoes on Twitter.
Yes, that's the one. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.